Has COVID made you see work differently?
People now appreciate how much they depend on so many people who were invisible before.
Key worker or non-essential, working from home or furloughed. COVID has turned lives upside down, delineating jobs and workplaces in new ways.
Some jobs that exist now won't exist in the future, and there will be new jobs.
The biggest unemployment crisis for decades will raise some longer-term questions.
Full-time employment, better terms and conditions, more investment in our people.
What changes in our labour market do we want or need to see after COVID-19?
Trains haven't been running, food deliveries are said to be dwindling, factories are closing.
Trade union membership in the UK peaked at the end of the 1970s.
How is their power to be channeled into constructive channels? That's a question for the government. There's a question for the trade union movement too.
In the years since, its decline is seen by some as a shift in power between employer and employee. A shift, some think, that has gone too far.
Thus far and no further.
Another part of levelling up, in my view, should be a deliberate policy to try to support initiatives to support labour, possibly at the expense of making things a little bit tougher for the owners of capital.
I believe this is a time to look after the vulnerable, to look after those who looked after us during the lockdown, the workers in the supply chains that kept us fed, clothed, and with pharmaceuticals, the people in the supermarkets, the people, of course, in the hospitals.
We need productive, engaged workers, people who are happy in their jobs. It's one of the things that we've just talked about in this country in the past decade. We haven't done something about it. We've had lots and lots of reports, and now is the time to act.
A parcel spends only a couple of minutes on the Hermes conveyor belts in Warrington.
At the beginning of the pandemic, we had a lot of toilet paper, toilet tissue was everywhere.
But that's enough for the team here to know how the country spent lockdown.
After a while, obviously, we got nice weather, so we had a lot of garden furniture, baby pools, bigger pools.
As those staying home flexed their fingers, this hub was handling 900,000 packages a day, about 50% more than normal.
After a while, we see loads of paint, so I'm presuming people were redecorating.
As well as adapting to working in a pandemic.
I went through phases. At the beginning, I was worried and I was maybe panicking a little bit as well. And now we've got everything in place to make sure that everyone's safe.
While Hermes doesn't use zero-hours contracts in its warehouse, much of the jobs growth after the last recession came from insecure forms of work.
According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, key workers are, on average, paid less than those in other occupations, with low pay particularly common in social care and in the food sector. Those key sectors also tend to make use of zero-hours contracts and other forms of employment that offer more limited rights and protections. Those taking risks to do essential work in this pandemic are more likely to be those getting a raw deal in the labour market.
I think one of the consequences of this crisis is that people realize that what's happened to our labour market over the last decades, which has resulted in growing informality of jobs and reduced benefits associated with jobs, and the shifting of risks onto individuals. So you're responsible for your pension. You're responsible for whether or not you have a job and you don't have any particular guarantees. That shifting of risks onto individuals, I think, arguably has gone too far.
Hermes was getting over 10,000 applications a day to be a courier in the first weeks of lockdown. Howard has been driving his route for nearly 8 years, but he's got a new response to his work recently.
I've had things given to me. I've had food parcels, which is very, very appreciated. You know, when it's really hard to get the food. I've had a face mask made for me, a proper one.
Most drivers are self-employed, paid per parcel, but about a quarter, like Howard, have opted for what's called SE+, offering holiday pay and minimum pay guarantees under a deal with the GMB union.
Prior to SE+, if you wanted your holidays, you had to find your cover. If you couldn't find your cover, then there's a chance you could lose your round or not have a round when you came back. Simple as that.
This crisis has thrown insecure work into the spotlight, not least in social care, and that has created an urgent need for action, according to one business leader.
What we have to do is move the other way. Full-time employment, better terms and conditions, more investment in our people, more opportunity for them to share in how a company is doing.
And would you like to see some of that being mandated and driven by government?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be really key to look at the way in which we can share wealth going forward in a different way and make sure that more people in the economy can absolutely gain from how their businesses do. So when businesses are successful, they share more of that with their staff. The 1980s, known for big hair and big jobless figures. If we're entering the worst period of unemployment since then, it would usually make it more difficult for workers to get better rights or better pay. But unions and tougher labour laws may not be the answer.
I think flexibility in the labour market is really important in order to help companies adjust and be able to cope with competition. Where I think we fail is on providing those workers who lose their jobs security and support to find a new job. People often talk about this system that's very common in Northern Europe called flexicurity, where you have very flexible labour markets, but lots of security for the workers. So you protect the worker, not the job.
Lockdown didn't just mean changes for key workers. For those lucky enough to be in work but out of the office, it may even have had its advantages.
I am seeing this certainly in the city now. Businesses are considering strategically, how do we, make our workforce, happier, more productive, less time spent commuting, less money spent on real estate.
Years of progress on remote working and digital tools achieved in a few weeks.
So at the moment across the UK, we've got 19,000 people working from home.
Professional services firm Deloitte is starting to reopen its offices, but most people will be at home for the foreseeable future. And a remote working boom will have its knock-on effects in areas already hard hit by the crisis.
Normally you would have 3,000 or 4,000 people working here. Lots of bars and restaurants will be open, shops. People coming to work in the city centre drives other parts of our city centre economy. So it's important that we remember that when we're thinking about these situations.
For property companies, the shift presents a big challenge.
I think we're going to move much more away from a sort of plain vanilla office where you go in and sit at a desk into spaces where people can come together and collaborate.
Bruntwood is a regional office company, reacting to the trend of more flexible working, supercharged by COVID.
I worry a bit about the notion that the office is dead, because I think the office is actually quite a great leveller. So for some people, working at home is great, it's comfortable, it's a pleasant environment. That's not the case for everyone.
The accelerated reality of lockdown has unleashed changes in where we work and how we work, the effects of which aren't yet clear. There is an immediate jobs crisis, but some fear the pandemic may have pushed companies towards automation that ultimately could displace workers longer term. Tackling all this will require creating new good jobs and equipping people for them. Either way, the COVID impact won't affect everyone equally.
The question I want to look at is, how does this change, this revolution in our attitude to digital working, how can that be extended? That, I think, is where we need to do some joining up in the next year or so, thinking what a greener and more digitally flexible economy will look like, in the hope that it will, in the long run, be more inclusive for people, not simply another turn of the screw, another round of nice jobs for already well-paid and well-educated people.
This unemployment crisis will require the UK to succeed where it has previously struggled.
we invest very little in helping people to reskill and get back into work.
To think about what features of past recoveries need to be changed.
I very much fear that this pandemic is going to intensify the process that we have been seeing over the last 12 years.
And to consider what debt society owes to its essential workforce and how that should be settled.